I'm Kelsey Litchfield, and this is the Field Advisor Podcast, where I talk with local experts to unpack the latest agronomy information and research, giving you the knowledge to make informed decisions out in the field. Welcome back, everyone, to the Field Advisor Podcast. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, joined by Stephanie Porter, Outreach Agronomist at Illinois Soybean Association, and we have Matt Reardon. Welcome back, Matt. I'm kind of curious, Matt, to start us off here. If you could sum up weather in summer 2025, how would you summarize it?
Oh gosh.
Granted, I know that's a big question because it's a lot different from north to south to central to east to west, but give it your best shot.
For me personally, I can say humbling. It has been the month of July, just difficult to pin down these exact precipitation patterns. It was a reminder that this kind of happens every year around this time, but like my confidence as a meteorologist is at the lowest point. It's going to be in 2025, assuredly, just because these systems, as they've blown up, have been so hard to keep an eye on. And, trying to give people a rainfall outlook, even like 3 to 5 p.m., and it's the morning of, it's hard, right? These variable precipitation swaths. Some counties, I was just looking, I'm in Champaign, and downtown Champaign got 2 inches over the weekend, and then just south of town where our office is located, we got like 0.2. So that is not an easy forecast, the Friday before that weekend to pin down. So I'm looking forward to fall cold fronts like football, synoptic low pressure systems. Remember the L's on the map? Like, can we get some of those back so I can tell you where the front is, where the rain's going to come? So yeah, I would say humbling, at least as a forecaster personally.
Does the heat? Sorry, I'm chiming in. Does the heat have something to do with that? I mean, we like to talk about pop-up showers. Does that help with some of the rain that we've been getting, or maybe harder to predict?
Yeah, Stephanie, you're absolutely right. So it is this heat and moisture. So it's just like a warm bath water outside. When you walk out there, your glasses fog up, like right when you leave the door if you've been in air conditioning. And so like everywhere in Illinois has the instability with which to produce a thunderstorm, but you don't have any like coherent fronts, the blue with the scallops and the triangles on the map, like nothing obvious that's going to lift those storms in any given area. And so they just, like you said, they kind of bubble up, and then they'll leave what we call an outflow boundary or a cold pool. That's the rain cooled air beneath the storm that floods out almost like, pouring water on a tabletop. And then that can lift storms up along the way. And so it becomes this like permutation of bubbling storms, like boiling water throughout Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, through the Mid-South. You hear them called like popcorn thunderstorms sometimes because they kind of pop throughout the day. Or you'll hear the term like air mass thunderstorms, but yeah, they're hard to predict.
And the agronomists think that they have a little black rain cloud following them. And I've actually been to fields where we've been parked on the road, and we were trying to get ready to scout the field on the right-hand side, and not knowing if we should go in, we go in, then we get back out because we don't know where the storm's headed, and then it just pours on the field to the left, but the field to the right still super dry. And so we've seen a lot of that this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, I was listening to the NASCAR race on Sunday, which was in Indianapolis at Brickyard, and they had like 4 laps to go, and they threw out a yellow caution, and turn 1 it was raining, and people over in like turns 3 and 4, they're like, what the hell is going on? Like, why are we yellow? I mean, and they said the racetrack's like 500 acres or something like that. Sure. Don't quote me on that, but it just goes to show like how things can be so spotty. But that really put things into perspective for me. Like you said, you could be getting downtown Champaign, could be getting 2 inches, and then just south a couple miles, barely any. So it's just been so spotty. I keep hearing the word variable, which I think is the trend word. Maybe not of the summer, but for a couple of years. I mean, when is weather not variable?
It's a good reminder. I feel this way every July where, you're trying to pin down the forecast. But I will say, Stephanie, with that heat and the moisture that we've had, it has been like available with which to produce convection and storms. So we have, you can find dry spots. We were just talking about the new drought monitor, Kelsey, before this. You can find drier areas, but by and large, I mean, by the end of the week or by the end of the 2-week period, most of these counties, most of the acres are getting precipitation just by chance. You add up 5 days of 30% chance of storms, you're probably going to get some rainfall out of it.
So you mentioned it, the drought monitor. I wanted to quickly bring this up as we talk about, rainfall, soil moisture. When I was looking at these maps yesterday, I'm like, wow, that's quite a difference between 2 weeks. And I will say, so the data cutoff, we're recording this on a Tuesday morning. The data cutoff is today. So by Thursday, this map probably will change a little bit more, I'm assuming, with the rainfall. But talk about what you've seen with the soil moisture. I mean, just looking at these maps, some areas were abnormally dry, but they looks like they've gotten the rainfall. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's been this kind of strip from, I'd say like east, maybe like Cheyenne, Wyoming. You draw a line through Nebraska to Omaha. I've been calling it kind of the like I-80 drought this year. And Iowa, southern Iowa, northern Missouri, they've had plenty of rainfall here recently, so those drought classifications have been removed. But you can still see that like shadow of it all the way over to Chicago, northern Indiana, like Kokomo up through central and southwestern Michigan. That area has been lingering dry. They've had rainfall events. So if you look at their historical rainfall, I mean, they're still stair-stepping up, just not as much as we usually would get accumulated this time of year. So we've been hearing reports of, a little bit more stress up there, but they have had timely rains. And so that was the one area we've been kind of watching. I mean, earlier this year, Southern Illinois was just inundated, right? Flood event after flood event. We just talked recently. There's been some additional ones of those. It's improved a bit recently. And then, you could argue that getting into like the last 7 to 10 days and then looking out into the forecast a bit, that area might be trending a little bit drier. But that might not be a bad thing considering, where the crop is down there.
It seems like I have a friend that lives in the Marion area, and it seems like it just rains there every day. It seems like they've had a pop up about every day, and it seems like it just comes out of nowhere. So,
yeah, it is often like that in July.
So, anything else with the drought monitor that you wanted to share? Like I said, new day is going to come out in a few days, but I just thought, like you said, Northern Illinois. Stephanie, I'm curious if you're hearing that stress up from anyone up in Northern Illinois about dryness.
I think to his point, the Chicago area, but I think there has been, to his point again, some recent rain that everyone's felt pretty welcome about in our crop reports that we've heard. Not to say it isn't dry, but I think they are getting some showers at some timely times, especially for corn needed. And so they're thankful for that.
Steph or Kelsey, if you click on, or if you hover over maps, we'll see if we can see if we can do this live, and then hit the change maps, which is like 4 or 5 down.
Okay.
And then see that period there that you can drop down and select let's do 6 weeks. So this is going to show us the change in the last 6 weeks. You can see all the precipitation that we've had at the end of June through July through Nebraska, Iowa, Northwest Illinois. I mean, drought classifications removed through portions of North Central Illinois, portions of Northern Indiana. But look at the Northwest. That is where we've seen drought increasingly entrench. A number of classifications have been added to areas like Idaho, Central and Eastern Washington. So that area is looking to heat up a bit here over the next 5 days, and we've seen wildfire activity pick up there. So not Illinois weather, but that is, if you're going to talk about one area, seeing the specter of drought here in late summer, the biggest concern is probably the Northwest U.S.
So has the concern for drought lessened? Because I remember when we were talking back in May, there's concern every year, but it seemed like the conversations had really ramped up. So what are you talking with other, with your colleagues and things like that when it comes to drought remaining for the rest of the summer? Still a big concern, or you've got good soil moisture that it's not?
Yeah, not nearly the concern level we were at earlier this summer. I think we put it around 60% that we'd see some sort of regional drought in the Corn Belt this year. And frankly, I don't see it materializing. I mean, you could make the argument that I-80 drought caused some stress in June, but we know at the end of the year that ultimately it's those July and August rains that are going to make the crop. And it's looking pretty good right now. The NDVI values for the I states or even a wider growing regions are at record highs. That's just looking at how green these crops are from space. That doesn't always translate perfectly into yield, but more often than not, it's a pretty good guess that when we're seeing great values there, we're going to get a pretty good crop out of the ground. Frankly, the only thing I'm seeing that could, maybe be yield robbing is we've seen overnight temperatures increase. So Stephanie, we talked about that moisture. As you bring that moisture up from the Gulf of Mexico, from the Atlantic, that increases your overnight temperatures. It kind of puts like a floor on how low you can get those temperatures overnight. So we've seen a lot of nights creep up into 73, 74, 75. I think we had a 76 here recently. We know in late July, silks are out, tassels out, we're largely pollinated. that crop's stressed overnight. It does not want to be working to cool itself off overnight. And so that could be one thing at the end of the year. I still think we're looking at a pretty darn good crop, but might take the top off a little bit if it surprises us at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think we are hearing we're running into some pollination issues. That could be genetic, of course, and I don't think anybody has a good handle of how widespread it is. It's being talked about a lot. Even though the plant's green, you go out there and you pull the ear, and there's some pollination issues.
Yep.
And so, to your point, yeah, there's the nighttime temperatures have caused corn to respirate heavily, and silks could be desiccating in the heat. And so I think that we're just at the point where people are starting to check that pollination and making sure that they have kernels there. And then, yeah, here on out, we're worried about kernel fill as well. And so that was my next question. I'm more worried about heat, especially with this corn crop going forward. And it looks like we're going to get a cool down period. Please tell me yes.
Yeah. I feel like I'm finally a popular meteorologist this week because I can say safely that the cool down is coming tomorrow, Wednesday evening into Thursday. And then most people love hearing that. I think our overnight low Thursday evening, especially if you're kind of north of I-72, is going to crack into the 50s, which, gosh, after the last 10 days is going to feel pretty awesome.
And I know
winter.
But we do like rain for the bean crop. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the corn crop now.
Right.
And you can't really truly talk about beans until it's just those August rains are very crucial as well for grain fill.
Yeah, so I was looking up 2014 and 16. So both corn and soybeans, I think, had a big bump over trend that year. I mean, a lot of that decade had right above trend yields in that stretch near the latter half, but those years specifically maybe had the biggest delta over it. And those years, I talked about this morning in a forecast, they had a lot of that August rainfall. So you get that rainfall. Typically, that's going to keep temperatures down a little bit otherwise. And those were some big crops in the middle of that decade. So it's trending that way. The kind of, I'll call it the mid-August period is starting to look a bit wet for Illinois, Indiana, and that stretched through Iowa here. So no, I'm not worried about drought right now, given the forecast. We did see some kind of in analog years. We track this thing called the MJO. It's the Madden-Julian oscillation. It's hard to explain. We don't even have a great understanding of it, but it's essentially a tropical circulation that tends to impact our weather in somewhat predictable ways here in late summer. It can also influence hurricanes critically in the Atlantic. And we're seeing it move into phases where historically it has brought some heat and drought concern into August in the Midwest. When I look out at models, I'm not seeing them agree with that. And so it lessens my confidence of that right now. So I think if anything, the heat or dryness in August would have to come late August. And that would make sense because we've been in this like rinse and repeat pattern, I think, in Illinois over the kind of the last 4 to 6 weeks where we get some rain, we cool it off, and then inevitably those temperatures slowly rise. The heat advisories trickle back in. We get an extreme heat warning. And then we're talking about like a derecho in Iowa. The remnants of that make it through here. I think that's coming like tomorrow. Probably not as severe as we saw last night in Iowa. And then that ushers in the repeat period of cool down, which is on its way for the next 5 to 10 days.
Much needed. I think it would help everyone, not only maybe the crops, but I think everyone, because I keep hearing, is summer over yet? I'm like, well, let's talk again here in January if you really want summer to be over with the temperatures. Okay, so anything else, Matt, looking into August that kind of raises your eyebrows or you want people to know about?
Yeah, so I talked about that MJO. So you can think of it as it's really kind of a scent over the tropics, and it moves geographically about the equator. Right now, it's in the central and eastern Pacific. So it's kind of west of Peru, well southwest of California, south of Hawaii, in that corridor there. What we're seeing right now in that area is like tropical storm galore. There's major Hurricane Iona that's spinning south of Hawaii, well south of the state, not a threat. Looks pretty on satellite, but it's what we call a fish storm right now. We have other areas of development we're watching in the Eastern Pacific. The National Hurricane Center is watching a close eye on those. That's that MJO. That's that ascent and that kind of favorable lift for tropical thunderstorms and tropical storms that develop from those that's parked over that area. Over the next 10 days, it's coming to the Atlantic. It moves west to east around the equator. So you would think if we park that same favorability for lift and development over the Atlantic, we're going to see an uptick potentially in Atlantic hurricanes, or at least areas to watch as we get into early to mid-August. Now, the only caveat I'll put on that is the Atlantic has been unfavorable in July. Remember, we had a lot of storms to talk about kind of really early in the season, late June, early July. We haven't had much since then. There's been wind shear. Hurricanes don't like wind shear, and we've seen a lot of Saharan dust coming from Africa, and that's dry air. Hurricanes don't like dry air. So there's this thinking that that activity is going to pick up in mid-July. That would be something to watch if they can slowly meander and make their way all the way up into the Midwest. But we do have this caveat as the Atlantic has been so far somewhat suppressive of hurricane development. And I think it'll be a mixed bag when we get into mid-August. We'll have a storm or two to watch, but I don't think it'll be as active as what we're seeing in the Central and Eastern Pacific today, for example.
Hurricanes, didn't even think about that one. Okay, so Stephanie, go ahead.
No, I'm exactly, that was one of the things I was going to ask him about, because some of my, again, friends from the South we're used to seeing that rain from hurricanes. And I think we did a little bit. They kind of saved us actually last year around this time. And that's where we got the rain. And so their question was, we're getting, basically you've already answered it. The heat is causing what I would call pop-up storms. And we're not getting necessarily the rain from the hurricanes. But I can't imagine if we were getting both. But just lots of rain.
Yeah, July, I think it was July 5th of last year, Hurricane Beryl made landfall in Texas as a Cat 1, and its remnants, like, we were dry. I mean, parts of Illinois, Indiana, into Michigan, like, that swath there we were looking at some serious dryness built into those soils, and Beryl just came right up through that corridor. It's like prayers answered. I say that, it also produced a number of tornado reports from Indiana all the way up into, like, Buffalo, New York. So these things don't come without a double-edged sword.
Okay, so when it rains, it pours. I told you I wanted to ask you about this because I was just prepping for our conversation today. And Trent Ford, who's the Illinois state climatologist, he posted something really interesting yesterday about intense precipitation. And, I started reflecting on this article, and I can share it here for people to see if they want to go read the full thing. I won't cover it all here, but it got me really thinking about these intense rainfall moments. And I kept thinking, gone are the days do we just get a really nice rainfall where it's soft and nice and neat? And I'm throwing adjectives out there like that. But it seems like when we get rain, it just pours and pours and pours, flash floods, all that. And we don't get just a good amount of rainfall where none of that happens, So I'm kind of curious on your take on the intense precipitation. I'll read this to summarize the post for people who are like, what are you talking about? So Trent noted a 40% increase in days with 2 inches or more of rain since the early 1900s. He highlighted how localized convective storms, like he mentioned, there's 4 to 6 inches that hit Rockford in a single day in 2024, are getting hard to predict, more damaging. And he went into the outdated infrastructure and all of that. So he just talked about how the intense rainfall, the frequency of that is increasing. And I wonder if maybe some people have observed that. And then some of these storms, like we've kind of been talking about, are getting harder to predict. So what's your take on intense precipitation and these rainfall, not just this summer, but maybe in the past 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say Trent's an excellent climatologist, scientist. Had the privilege to meet him a few times now. So I do invite people to read this article and his work, because it's it's a good call out given what we've seen. Sort of the eastern part of the country, maybe Mississippi River and east. I say that we just saw some intense flooding. Really, you could use the word catastrophic in the Texas Hill Country floods. And as it relates, I'll say 2 things. One, as it relates to this year, we have seen a very strong, anomalously strong Bermuda high. This is a semi-permanent high pressure system that sits off the eastern seaboard, coincidentally near the island of Bermuda, and it's just been pumping moisture from the Atlantic and the Gulf up into the eastern U.S. So if you felt like this year we've seen more flash flooding, more flood emergencies, more of these high intensity events, that's likely connected to that Bermuda high being stronger this year. But the second piece to this is, over the last 40 years, we're always trying to gauge, what might be a spurious trend that maybe we're seeing something and it might not be there, and what's a more firm trend where we can say, hey, I think this is what we're going to be dealing with here for the next 10 to 20 years. And I will say the extreme precipitation events, Trent highlights it here, is one of the things that pops out in the data as one of those firm trends that we're going to be seeing more of these high intensity events more often over the next 10 to 20 years. Is my confidence in that like 99.9%? No, it never is. This is in some ways an inexact science. We've seen it enough. It's been recorded over a long enough period, decades, where we can establish it as a climate trend. We can make that connection that we have a little bit more heat in the atmosphere. It's a very simple relationship with water. If the more heat in the atmosphere, the more water it can hold. You would think then any given rainstorm would have that much more water to come out of it. So we're seeing these more intense events. You can just think off the top of your head, the Eastern Kentucky event, I think 2 years ago, obviously the Texas Hill Country floods of this year. And then I think like downtown Chicago, like near the United Center, saw 5 or 6 inches of rain, I think in late June, maybe early July, that apparently there was a water rescue or two. And then just generally across the state, I'm hearing like viaducts are flooding. Somebody lost their car into one and they were all able to get out safely. So it is an established trend. It's something to be mindful of. And he makes a good call out. I mean, 2 or 3 inches of rain over a short period of time is not necessarily drought busting if it all ends up in the river system, if it causes flash flooding, if it causes damage, leaching of nitrogen. You know, we saw that in Southern Illinois earlier this spring. So it's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I thought was so interesting about it, because he talked about the overwhelmed infrastructure. That's a lot of rapid runoff and it can't handle that. Sewer overflows, and then you get into public health risks and that side of it. But then, like you said, the erosion and nutrient loss side of it as well in these farm fields, that the water's just running off and maybe not getting into the ground because it's coming so quickly. But just something I think is fascinating to observe and think about definitely going forward. And one thing he also talked about too then was it's hard to predict. Like we've kind of been saying this whole episode, you know, these pop-up showers dump a lot of rain. And I'm wondering, like, how does this all happen so quickly? Like, you can't predict everything. Like you said, 99.9 sure, not sure of something, but it's something to definitely learn from.
Yeah.
I was going to add too, I've noticed or heard in the past 10 years or so that, you know, not only you talked about infrastructure being able to handle the rain, but we have a lot of engineer designed soil structures, conservation efforts that are only designed to hold or cap it at so much water. And so that could be an issue as well in order to, you know, conserve soil when we make some berms or for perhaps larger structures. They're just not sometimes engineered to handle that much water at one time.
Yeah, absolutely. My biggest concern going forward, I think too, is that people talk about tornadoes all the time, rightfully so. They talk about these wind events. We just saw a maybe derecho, if they'll classify it, in northern Iowa, eastern Minnesota last night. These tend to make headlines, but flooding can catch people off guard because it's not that flashy. You're not going to see, you know, a giant wave of water, you know, crashing over Gibson City during that flooding. It was just this slow rise. And it is as life-threatening as any of these other events. We saw that this year. And I just remind folks, if do not drive through it. The turnaround, don't drown is real. And that's one of the number one killers, frankly, in some of these flooding events is it doesn't look dangerous. It's not a flash event. So they think, oh, I'll just drive through it. And that car can become a death trap very quickly.
Yeah, definitely. We'll share this link to Trent's article in the show notes so you can go read it yourself. But just an interesting, very interesting article that he wrote. So I wanted to give him a shout out and just briefly talk about it here. Okay, so wrapping up, I'm curious, Matt, I asked you this last time. Any other notable weather events happening around the U.S. or even the globe? I find this so fascinating. You know, we like to focus on Illinois. We want to focus on Illinois, but you know, weather happens everywhere, of course. I'm just curious if you have anything that you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, I think we talked about the Northwest drought. That'd be able to be the biggest one that I'm thinking about just in terms of getting into August as their kind of peak wildfire season there. So worried about that area. We've also seen a little bit of a resurgence in La Nina activity. I'm not going to call it an official La Nina because we're not there yet. We're still in what we call in-zone neutral. So that is trying to define whether the Central Pacific is in this kind of La Nina state that we watch or El Nino. And that can determine more of our weather in winter. So now that kind of, as we transition, we start harvesting this crop, you're going to hear us talking about that more and more. If you would have asked me a month ago, I would have said it's a total coin flip. especially right. I started this talking about my lack of confidence and some of the forecasting here this July. So I wasn't ready to call it by any means. But over the last 3 weeks, we have seen those water temperatures decrease in the Central Pacific. So colder waters in the Central Pacific, at least relative to average, is how we define La Nina when it reaches a certain threshold. And we've seen those temperatures cool off toward that threshold. And it's making us wonder, are those La Nina chances a little bit higher going through this winter? It tends to correlate here with more active and interesting winters, kind of like what we saw last winter with a little bit more snowfall in the central and southern portion of the state. But we saw Chicago and areas up toward Minneapolis actually had less snowfall. So that's what we're keeping an eye on here as we go into fall. We've also seen a few signals that could be dealing with a little bit of drier fall conditions along the Mississippi River Valley. Yet again, that's consistent with some trends that we've seen over the last 4 years. Right now, don't have a high level of confidence in those, but I'd say those are the two biggest things looking long term that I'm focused on.
Maybe when we regroup in August, we can talk about harvest a little more and that weather pattern. Stephanie, you got any more questions?
I think you've covered it.
My last question for you, Matt, is do you get as much flack as a TV meteorologist do on TV? Like, do you hear people say, oh, you must have the greatest job because you're wrong most of the time or something along those lines?
No, I don't think I'm at the level of what, a TV meteorologist would have to deal with. But I've heard my share of comments. And again, I wouldn't blame them in this month of July. It's hard to pin down these pop-up thunderstorms and where they're going to hit each day. So I think it's a privilege to cover the weather. I love talking about the weather. I think it's probably pretty obvious that if this just went on for another 2 hours, I'd just sit here and keep talking about it. But at the same time, if you're going to cover it, you have to be on all the time when the weather's happening. And so we take that seriously. And two, you have to try your best to get it right and prove that over time. So I'm not without criticism, and I take it to heart because it's a privilege to do this job, and I love doing it.
That's a great note to end on. So thanks, Matt, for your continued, your blogs, being on the podcast. I know the weather's always a big subject, especially this summer. It seems like it more than ever. So thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Kelsey.
Thanks for listening to the Field Advisor Podcast. Unbiased, independent agronomy information to keep your farm moving forward. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, your voice from the field. This podcast is funded by the Illinois Soybean Association Checkoff Program. Stay connected with Field Advisor on social media. Follow, like, and share to keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe to the Field Advisor Podcast on your favorite podcast platform.